Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Sometimes that can be quite daunting because I've been lucky enough, I think, to have done a wide number of things. Started life as a journalist, and prior to that, the military. So did a couple of years in the military and then went into journalism and meandered and made my way into marketing, sales and marketing. And that's more or less where I've been there. I've had a couple of roles, general managers roles and CEO's roles and various leadership, been in my own business, done quite a lot of things. Would bore you to have to listen to them all.
That's awesome. So how did you get into leadership? Have leadership roles in that? How did you get into it?
It was an interesting experience. I was working for a company that did publishing, so graphic design, printing, developing newsletters, magazines, PR, that sort of thing. And they had a sales team of about 13 people, and I was one of the salespeople, as well as an account manager and a business of probably about 70, 80 staff. So relatively small global terms. So you got to do everything. And the managing director was he was new to the role. He was from Liverpool, short guy, walked with a good sort of swagger, knew what he was about. And he used to run the sales team. And one day some of the sales team was saying to him, we really need a dedicated sales manager. 13 people, it's a good sized team, and we need somebody to look after our priorities. And in the middle of the sales meeting, he looked at them and he said, well, about Colin taking over the role, which was the first I'd heard of it.
Wow.
And I had to sit there while each person around the table had to give the pros and cons of why they thought I'd be a good fit for the role or not. And I remember at one stage, one of the older ones, he was probably a bit more resistant to this 20-something-year-old taking over as their boss, said, we haven't asked Colin yet what he thinks. And your first instinct is to be humble and go, oh, there's so much more experience than me in the room and all of that sort of thing. And I thought to myself, you hear about opportunities coming along, and this is one of those moments. I'm going to grab this with both hands. And of course, I said, no, I'm up for this. And that's how I ended up in my first leadership role.
Excellent. And so when you were talking about the 20-something-year-old taking over, and there were probably obviously older people in the team, how did that transition go? Were they happy? Were you happy? How did it go for you?
Yeah, I got the role because most of the team thought that I'd be a good fit for it, and they would be happy to work with me. But I was 28, I think, and 27, and there were some salespeople in that role who were in their 40s, possibly early 50s. It's a bit hard to gauge age when you're 28, and they were naturally, I think, resistant to it, or maybe a bit resentful. I had that dynamic to deal with at quite an early age. And I remember my sort of I remember it quite clearly. I was running a sales meeting and it was about 4:30, maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And the one salesperson in particular was saying, oh, it's knocking off time. I'm going now. It's knocking off time. I'm going now. And I was leading to wrap up the meeting, but then I got a bit stubborn and went on for a couple more minutes, and she persisted with it's knocking off time. So eventually I walked to the door and I opened the door and I said to her, Donna, here's the door. If you want to leave, you can leave. And anybody else who wants to leave with you can join you. And she had half risen and everybody just stayed put in their chairs, didn't move. So she sunk back into her chair, and that was the last challenge I had from her.
Yeah, interesting, eh? Yeah, because the reason I asked that question is because there are different generations that are in organizations today more than ever. And of course, how do they actually work together and so forth? And I find a lot of the younger leaders struggle with themselves personally, they think they have this imposter syndrome, or they have this thought that they have in their mind of, what are they going to think? And can I do it? And so forth. And it's really interesting to see how the transition goes. And so sometimes there are some things that need to be ironed out, but it tends to work its way through and go, okay.
Yeah, I think ignoring a situation doesn't help. You do need to address it. You do need to address it assertively and confidently. And obviously, you have to have the confidence to back yourself. If you do that, if you address the situation and look to resolve it, these things usually have a way of working out. It's when we leave a problem to persist that it becomes a real problem.
I grew up in a large family. And when I say large, I'm 12 of 13 children. And we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of fun. And I think I knew quite early that I was a leader, or I was different. And I also realized that everybody had a personality type. And we would play games. You imagine we could put a cricket team together, or a couple of rugby teams, or a football game pretty much on our own as a family. And I would be the one, as the second youngest, that would organize everything. And I would make the rules up, or change the rules, or become the referee. And I think we're born as leaders, and then we learn to adapt. But I had a lot of fun as a child, and I had a great upbringing. And I think that I left school when I was 15. I didn't have the opportunity of a university education, and that was all good. I've never gone back and tried to do that. But what I did learn at school was a little bit about business. And my first business, and some people probably won't like this, was my older brothers would buy cartons of cigarettes, and I would break them down and sell them individually. So I knew at that stage that I was an entrepreneur, and that I could get people to buy from me, and that if I created opportunities, people would follow me. And so my brothers did very well out of my little first business, and I did well as well.
Excellent. Well done. And so when you say born as leaders, but then we learn to adapt, what are some things that some leaders, who are leaders, or even others who say, I don't think I was born as a leader, what would you say to them? What would you say to people to help them learn to adapt? What would they do?
I would say that we all have some leadership qualities, but some of us know inherently from a very early age that we are born to lead, and the others will follow. What I would say to other people who are learning how to lead people is that they need to be confident, and public speaking is a very important part of that, being able to orate or portray the message of being confident that people will follow you. Leadership is about belief in the person that you are following. And it's really important for you, if you're learning to be a leader, to research into what a good leader is, and what those qualities are. And for me, those are having self-belief, being confident, not being afraid to fail. And it's all about the tribe. Have a tribe, people that will follow you.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting about the not afraid to fail, because I think a lot of people don't go and do things in life because they do fear that failure or not succeeding, and they always want it to be perfect. And I don't think it will ever be perfect for them. And so, yeah, not afraid to fail, I think is a big one there for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you. And so you said at a young age at school and that you could see yourself with different sporting things that you did and arrangements, and you're leading. And then I could see, from your introduction, you're in some corporate roles in that corporate ladder, some several high level positions, both in New Zealand and the UK. So how did you get into leadership?
When I left school at 15, I was laboring for a while. I was quite happy just to be out of school and not being told what to do. That was the other problem I had with school, is everybody wanted to tell me what to do. And as a leader, you find that a little bit frustrating at times, even when you're 15, and probably more so as a teenager. With 5 of them now, none of them want to be told what to do. But I was lucky enough to join a company as a storeman, and quickly became a sales rep for them, and then became a branch manager for them when I just turned 20. And they were a New Zealand-wide company owned by a French parent company. And so there was a lot of opportunity in that business. And I spent a fair amount of years with that company, just working my way up what I call the corporate leadership channels, doing what you need to do. And then when I decided it was time to go overseas, when I went to the UK, I was fortunate again to join a company that was actually going to be my employer, it turned out, for 11 years. So I spent 11 years with the same company in the UK. And that was in the electrical distribution field. I guess what the UK taught me really about leadership was that you needed to play at your best all the time. You couldn't have a bad day consistently that it would catch up with you. Whereas in New Zealand, we're a little bit laid back as a whole. In the UK, there were very little opportunities for error if you wanted to continue your leadership journey to that next level.
Right.
So fundamentally, two companies gave me a very long stint in the corporate world, and I ended up with way too many staff and was finding it just a huge challenge. Some of the things I learned in that corporate world was that I learned how to make money, make a lot of money for the company, who in turn that made a lot of money for me. And so to do that, I had to become a leader at that stage that ran a very profitable business, which meant making some really tough calls around staff, expenses, and I essentially became a hatchet man, which is not a great thing for a leader to be, because we can be quite ruthless.
Yep.
In pursuit of what we want to achieve. And so it taught me that to play at those sorts of levels, that you really can't be too personable with any of your staff, that you have to lead by example, and that you really have to drive your business. And so a lot of the traits as a leader that I was learning were ruthlessness, money at all costs, all those sorts of things. And I was in my 20s and 30s, and that was actually okay for me. Then I enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Okay, good points. And so, yeah, sometimes we do need to make those tough calls, or we have those tough decisions or discussions and that. And I think the important thing is that you do it, in the sense, a lot of leaders don't make decisions. They sit back and they don't actually want to do it. And I think it's really important they do make decisions and then get on with it. It may not be the right decision. It may not be the right answer or the right thing. You can at least adapt from it once you've made a decision and move forward, which I think is really key.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So the question I've got for you here now is, now this person could be alive or from history. So who's your favorite leader and why?
Winston Churchill.
Huh? Okay, and why?
Winston Churchill. I have a lot of heroes, but Winston Churchill is my favorite leader. If you talk about heroes, which are a little bit different, I would talk about the Nelson Mandelas of this world. But as an absolute leader, Winston Churchill, no one turned failure to better use than Winston Churchill. Everybody knows what happened when he was the First Lord of the Admiralty, the disastrous attack that he planned and failed so badly at Gallipoli. He resigned and then went to basically volunteered to go to the front in France and fight. So he was prepared to go right to the very front to make amends. And then when he re-entered politics, the rest is history. Then we hear all the good things and the awesome things about the leader that he was. But I think the most important thing about Winston Churchill is that he could speak so profoundly. And we all know the speech about we will fight on the beaches and die. I don't have to repeat that. But he spoke and people listened and people followed. And he had the belief of the people. And if anybody got in his way, then he just moved them to the left or the right and carried on. And without Winston, we could be sitting in a very different world.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.